The mirror was whole, but it showed the figure standing in the room, its form clearer, its face still a void. The hum was deafening, the air thick with the smell of blood, the walls closing in, the symbols glowing brighter, urging them to touch, to stay. Emily dropped her notebook, its pages scattering, the handwriting now her own, though she hadn't written it. Mia screamed, her flashlight falling, the beam spinning across the floor, catching glimpses of more figures, circling, watching. Lucas grabbed the door, pulling it open, but it led to another hallway, endless, identical, the hum a roar, the air choking. At 2 p.m., they ran, the hallway twisting, the doors blurring past, each one opening to room 13. Always different, always wrong, new furniture, new objects, new shadows. At 10:19 p.m., they found a window, impossibly high, overlooking Ashwood, but the town was wrong empty, its streets twisted, its lights dim. The hum was softer now, coaxing, promising answers if they stayed. Emily's hands trembled, her eyes fixed on the mirror, where the figure was closer, its hand reaching, its breath cold against her neck. Lucas smashed the window with a chair, the glass shattering, the air rushing in, clean, cold, real. They climbed out, falling onto the grass, the inn behind them, its windows dark, its door closed. At 10:47 p.m., they stumbled into Ashwood, the town quiet, the streets normal, the inn unchanged, its sign still swaying. They called the police from a gas station, their voices shaking, their hands cold. At 11:14 p.m., officers searched room 13, finding nothing, no symbols, no objects, just a bed, a dresser, a mirror, all as it should be. The innkeeper swore no one had stayed in room 13 that night, his eyes avoiding theirs, his hands trembling. Clara's notebook was gone, Lucas's photos blank, Mia's flashlight dead. Ashwood whispered of the inn, of guests who saw rooms that weren't there, of nights that changed, of figures that followed. Emily stopped traveling, her stories unwritten, her dreams haunted by mirrors and hums. Lucas's camera stayed locked away, his photos empty, his sleep broken by shadows. Mia left Elkwood, her research abandoned, her nights filled with the sound of doors opening, closing. At 6:17 p.m., every evening, the air grew heavy, the hum returned, and the Ashwood Inn stood waiting, its rooms changing, its shadows watching, forever shifting, forever calling. In this new story, the winter of 2014 was recorded as one of the most brutal seasons in the history of the Midwest. A massive polar vortex had descended upon the region and turned the landscape into a frozen wasteland of ice. The snow fell in sheets that were so thick they blotted out the streetlights and the moon completely. The temperature dropped to levels that were dangerous for anyone caught outside for more than a few minutes. The local authorities advised everyone to stay off the roads and to remain indoors until the storm passed. But life does not always stop for the weather, and some people had to brave the elements that night. Caleb was a 35-year-old architect who prided himself on his punctuality and his unwavering reliability to his family. He was driving his reliable sedan down a country road that he had traveled 1,000 times before. The road connected his office in the city to the quiet suburb where he lived with his wife. He had left work early to beat the storm, but the weather moved faster than the forecasters predicted. The snow began to accumulate on the windshield faster than his wipers could clear it away from the glass. The black asphalt of the road disappeared under a layer of white powder that hid the lane markers. He gripped the steering wheel with both hands and leaned forward to see through the swirling vortex of snow. The heater in his car was blasting hot air, but the cold managed to seep through the glass. He reached for his phone, which was mounted on the dashboard, to send a quick update to his wife. He used the voice command feature to dictate a message so he could keep his hands on the wheel. The text message was sent at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening to his wife waiting at home. It consisted of 2 simple words that would haunt her forever, and those words were almost home. His wife, named Sarah, received the message and felt a wave of relief wash over her anxious mind. She was in the kitchen preparing a warm dinner and listening to the wind howl against the windows. She replied with a heart emoji and told him to drive safely and to watch out for ice. She set the table and waited for the sound of his car pulling into the driveway as usual. The minutes ticked by and turned into an hour without any sign of headlights cutting through the darkness. She checked her phone again and saw that her last message to him had not been delivered yet. She tried to call him, but the call went straight to voicemail without ringing even a single time. The panic began to set in as she realized that his commute should have only taken 30 minutes. She paced the living room floor and looked out the front window every time a car passed by. She called his office, but the security guard told her that everyone had left the building hours ago. She called the local police department, but the lines were jammed with reports of accidents and stranded motorists. She finally got through to a dispatcher who told her to stay calm and wait for an update. The storm raged on through the night and dumped nearly 2 feet of snow on the sleeping town. Sarah did not sleep at all, but sat by the window watching the snow pile up outside. The sun rose the next morning and revealed a world that was buried in a blanket of white. The roads were impassable and the schools and businesses were closed due to the state of emergency declared. A sheriff deputy finally made it to her house in a large four-wheel drive vehicle that morning. He told her that they had found Caleb's car abandoned on the side of the road 3 miles away. Sarah felt a surge of hope because finding the car meant that he might have walked to a house. She asked the deputy if they had checked the nearby homes or if he was at the hospital. The deputy looked grim and told her that the car was empty and the engine was cold. There were no footprints around the vehicle because the heavy snow had filled them in during the night. The car was parked neatly on the shoulder as if he had pulled over to check something. The keys were gone, but his wallet and his laptop bag were still sitting on the passenger seat. The search and rescue team was assembled quickly despite the difficult conditions and the freezing temperatures of the day. They brought in tracking dogs that were trained to find people buried in the snow or lost in woods. The dogs sniffed the car seat to get Caleb's scent and immediately ran toward the dense forest nearby. The woods bordered a large frozen lake and a series of steep ravines that were dangerous in winter. The team followed the dogs into the tree line while fighting against the deep drifts of fresh powder. The wind had died down, but the air was still cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. They searched for hours but found no sign of the missing architect in the immediate vicinity of the car. The snow was so deep that probing poles were used to check every lump and drift on the ground. The team expanded their search grid to cover a 5-mile radius around the abandoned vehicle that day. They found a single glove lying near a frozen creek bed about a mile from the road. Sarah confirmed that the glove belonged to Caleb and was a gift she had given him for Christmas. This discovery renewed the urgency of the search because it meant he was definitely in the woods alone. The glove was found far away from any houses or roads, which confused the experienced search team members. Caleb was a smart man who knew the area well and should have walked toward the town lights. There was no logical reason for him to head deeper into the wilderness and toward the frozen lake. The sun began to set on the second day, and the temperature dropped again to dangerous lows. The search was called off for the night to protect the safety of the rescue volunteers and dogs. Sarah sat at home with her parents and tried to understand why her husband would walk into danger. The investigation into the disappearance looked at every possible angle, including foul play and a staged event. The police checked his bank accounts and his phone records for any sign of trouble or secret plans. They found nothing unusual and confirmed that he was a happy man with no enemies or debts. The car had plenty of gas and the battery was dead because the lights had been left on. The mechanical inspection showed that the car was in perfect working order and had not broken down. This deepened the mystery of why he pulled over and why he left the safety of the vehicle. The days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months without any new leads or evidence found. The snow continued to fall and bury the secrets of the forest under layer after layer of ice. The official search was suspended, but Sarah continued to hire private investigators to look for her missing husband. She refused to give up hope that he was still out there somewhere waiting to be found alive. She put up flyers in every town in the county and created a website to gather tips. But the phone never rang, and the tips that came in were all dead ends or hoaxes. The spring thaw finally arrived in April, and the snow began to melt away from the woods slowly. The landscape changed from white to brown as the mud and the dead leaves were revealed again. A group of teenagers were hiking near the lake when they spotted something bright blue in the brush. They walked over to investigate and found a heavy winter coat lying on the ground near a tree. The police were called, and they identified the coat as the one Caleb was wearing when he vanished. The coat was found nearly 4 miles from where the glove had been discovered months earlier. The police brought the cadaver dogs back to the woods to search the area around the coat thoroughly. The dogs led the officers to a small cave that was hidden behind a cluster of large rocks. The cave was shallow and offered very little protection from the wind or the cold of winter. Inside the cave, they found the skeletal remains of Caleb, still wearing his suit and his dress shoes. He was huddled in the back of the cave in a fetal position with his arms wrapped around himself. The medical examiner determined that he had died of hypothermia on the night of the storm. But the discovery of the body raised more questions than it answered for the investigators and the family. Why had he walked 5 miles in the wrong direction through deep snow and dangerous terrain that night? Why had he taken off his coat, which was his only defense against the freezing cold air? And why did he pull over his car in the first place when he was only 3 miles from home? The police found his cell phone in his pocket and sent it to a digital forensics lab for analysis. The phone was damaged by the moisture, but the technicians were able to retrieve the data from the memory. The data revealed a series of photos that Caleb had taken after he pulled over to the side. The first photo showed a small kitten sitting in the middle of the road in the snow. This explained why a kind-hearted man like Caleb would stop his car in a blizzard. He likely got out to move the kitten to safety, and the animal ran into the woods. He followed the kitten into the tree line, thinking he could catch it quickly and return to his car. But the storm disoriented him and covered his tracks within minutes of him entering the dense forest. The text "almost home" was sent just seconds before he saw the kitten and pulled over to help. The phone data showed that he tried to use his GPS map to find his way back. But the signal in the woods was weak, and the cold drained his battery faster than normal. He wandered in circles for hours as the hypothermia began to affect his judgment and his mind. The condition caused him to feel confused and warm, which explained why he removed his heavy coat. He likely thought he was walking toward the lights of his house, but was walking further away. The cave was his final attempt to find shelter when his body could no longer keep moving forward. He sat down to rest and fell into the deep sleep that comes before death in the cold. The tragedy was that he was trying to do a good deed, and it cost him his life. The kitten was never found and likely perished in the storm, along with the man who tried to save it. Sarah wept when she saw the photo of the small animal that had lured her husband away. It was a heartbreaking image that showed the last thing he saw before the darkness took him. The button of the story is the fragile nature of the decisions we make in split seconds. A simple act of kindness turned into a nightmare because of the unforgiving power of the winter storm. Caleb was almost home and safe in his warm house with the family he loved so much. But fate intervened in the form of a lost animal and a whiteout that erased the world. The story serves as a reminder to stay in your vehicle during a storm, no matter what you see. The wilderness is waiting for a mistake, and it does not show mercy to those who enter unprepared. The spot on the road where he pulled over is now marked with a small wooden cross. People leave flowers and small toy cats there to honor the memory of the man who stopped. The woods behind the marker are quiet now, and the trees have grown over the path he took. But the locals still look at that patch of forest with a sense of sadness and respect. They know that a good man walked into those trees and never walked out again because he cared. It is a legacy of kindness that is mixed with the tragedy of a life cut short. Sarah eventually moved away from the house that held so many memories of waiting by the window. She could not bear to watch the snow fall on the driveway where his car should have been. She started a foundation in his name to help rescue animals in the city where it is safer. She wanted his death to have a meaning that went beyond the senseless loss of that night. The foundation saves thousands of animals every year and carries his name into the future with hope. It is the only way she found to make peace with the storm that took everything from her. The phone with the photo sits in a drawer in her new home as a keepsake of his character. It is a blurry image of a small gray kitten with wide eyes staring into the headlights. It captures the moment the decision was made and the path was changed forever for everyone. It is a testament to the fact that heroes do not always wear capes or fight villains. Sometimes they are just ordinary men who try to save a small life in the snow. And sometimes they pay the ultimate price for their humanity in the silence of the winter night. The storm of 2014 is gone, but the story of the text message remains a cautionary tale. It reminds us to hold our loved ones close and to cherish every moment we have together. We never know when a simple text message might be the last words we ever say to someone. The line between safety and danger is thinner than we think and can vanish in the snow. And sometimes, almost home is the furthest distance in the world when the storm hits. She swapped their drinks to stay safe, but when the two men ended up unconscious, she realized too late that her actions had uncovered a dark conspiracy. What really happened that night? You won't believe what she discovered. Catherine, a 4-year-old law student, was about to embark on a night she would never forget. After a grueling week at NYU, where the pressures of studying law had weighed heavily on her mind and soul, she decided it was time to unwind. Her best friend Jackie had suggested they hit a local bar, a place buzzing with life and energy that seemed perfect for forgetting the burdens of academia, even if just for a few hours. As Catherine slipped into her favorite outfit, a mix of excitement and relief washed over her. The promise of laughter, music, and drinks felt like a much-needed escape from the relentless grind of her studies. When they arrived at the bar, the atmosphere was electric. The bass of the music pulsed through the air, lights flickered rhythmically, and strangers mingled as if they were old friends. Catherine felt herself melting into the moment, her worries fading into the background. She laughed freely, danced lightly, and let the warmth of the night envelop her. But little did she know, this seemingly ordinary evening would soon spiral into something far more intense than she could have ever imagined. In the midst of the vibrant chaos of the bar, Catherine and Jackie's eyes caught sight of two men sitting at the other end of the room. They were tall, strikingly handsome, and exuded an aura of confidence that drew attention without being intrusive. One of them, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, smiled warmly in their direction. His companion, blonde and equally charming, followed suit. It wasn't long before they approached Catherine and Jackie, introducing themselves as Sebastian and Luke. Their introductions were smooth, almost rehearsed, yet not in a way that felt disingenuous. "Mind if we join you?" Sebastian asked, his voice carrying a hint of flirtation, but nothing overtly unsettling. Jackie, always eager to meet new people, welcomed the idea immediately. Catherine hesitated for a fraction of a second. Her instincts often told her to be cautious, but there was something disarmingly genuine about these two men. Perhaps it was their relaxed demeanor, or the way they seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her and Jackie. Whatever it was, she found herself nodding yes, and soon they were all seated together, sharing stories and laughing as though they'd known each other for years. For a brief moment, Catherine allowed herself to believe that fate had brought them together for a pleasant, harmless encounter. As the night unfolded, drinks began circulating among the group. Catherine watched carefully as Sebastian and Luke offered them cocktails, their gestures polite and inviting. Yet, amidst the conviviality, a faint alarm bell rang in Catherine's mind. Over the past few months, she had read countless articles online about date rape drugs and the dangers of accepting drinks from strangers. These stories haunted her, lingering in the back of her mind like shadows waiting to emerge. Without drawing attention to herself, Catherine made a split-second decision. She subtly swapped the glasses when no one was looking, ensuring that Sebastian and Luke drank from the beverages originally intended for her and Jackie. This act wasn't born out of immediate suspicion. Rather, it was a precautionary measure, a small insurance policy against potential harm. Catherine knew better than to trust blindly, especially in environments where anything could happen. As she handed the glass back to Luke with a smile, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for deceiving them. But the weight of responsibility for her and Jackie's safety outweighed any fleeting discomfort. Deep down, she hoped her actions wouldn't lead to anything significant, but her gut told her otherwise. Minutes passed, and the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Catherine noticed subtle changes in Sebastian and Luke's behavior almost immediately. Their movements became sluggish, their words slurred, and their once bright smiles dimmed into expressions of confusion. Then, without warning, Sebastian swayed in his seat, clutching the edge of the table to steady himself. Moments later, he collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. Luke followed shortly after, his body crumpling into the chair beside him. The suddenness of it all left Catherine and Jackie frozen in shock. The bar around them continued its usual bustle, oblivious to the drama unfolding at their table. Jackie's voice broke the silence, trembling as she whispered, "What just happened?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at the motionless forms of the men who had seemed so friendly just moments ago. Catherine felt her heart pounding in her chest, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her mind raced with questions and fears, but one thought dominated above all others. What if those drinks weren't meant for us? The realization hit Catherine like a tidal wave. She now understood the gravity of what might have transpired. Those drinks weren't merely alcoholic beverages, they could have been laced with substances designed to incapacitate her and Jackie. The thought sent shivers down her spine, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she tried to process the situation. Beside her, Jackie clutched her arm tightly, her voice quivering as she pleaded, "We need to find out what's going on. Maybe they have answers in their apartment." But Catherine hesitated, torn between curiosity and caution. Her heart ached for clarity, but her instincts screamed louder. Staying longer in this environment felt dangerous, almost reckless. The fear of retaliation should Sebastian and Luke awaken and discover what she had done loomed large in her mind. Yet, despite her resolve to leave, a part of her couldn't shake off the feeling that she owed it to herself and perhaps to others to uncover the truth behind this sinister plot. Tears streamed down her face as she wrestled with the moral dilemma before her. In that moment, Catherine felt more vulnerable and alone than ever before, her world crashing around her as she faced the harsh reality of how quickly trust could turn into betrayal. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on Catherine's shoulders as she and Jackie debated their next move. The bar, once a place of laughter and lightheartedness, now felt suffocating, its walls closing in around them. Jackie, still shaken but determined, argued passionately that they should investigate further, perhaps even search Sebastian and Luke's apartment for answers. Her voice trembled with urgency. What if someone else is in danger? What if this isn't just about us? But Catherine, though equally disturbed, knew they had to prioritize their safety above all else. She vividly imagined the scenario if Sebastian and Luke regained consciousness and discovered what she had done by swapping their drinks. Retaliation seemed inevitable, and the thought of putting themselves in greater peril was unbearable. Catherine spoke softly but firmly, her words laced with conviction. "Jackie, we don't know what we're walking into. If these guys wake up and realize what happened, they could come after us. And involving the police, it's complicated. We have no proof, no evidence beyond our instincts. Right now, leaving is the safest choice." Tears streamed down Jackie's face as she reluctantly nodded, her heart heavy with regret over not pursuing the truth more aggressively. Together, they gathered their belongings and slipped out of the bar unnoticed, each step away feeling like both liberation and loss. As Catherine and Jackie walked briskly toward the subway station, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement, neither could shake off the lingering questions swirling in their minds. Who were Sebastian and Luke really? Were they truly malicious individuals intent on harming others? Or was this an unfortunate coincidence that spiraled out of control because of Catherine's precautionary actions? Each question opened up another layer of uncertainty, leaving them with more doubts than answers. Catherine glanced at Jackie, who stared blankly ahead, lost in thought. "Do you think they meant to hurt us?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackie hesitated before replying. "I don't know. Maybe they didn't expect you to swap the drinks. Maybe they didn't realize how strong whatever they put in there was." But deep down, Catherine wasn't convinced. Her gut told her that Sebastian and Luke's intentions weren't innocent, yet without concrete evidence, she couldn't be certain. This ambiguity gnawed at her, keeping her mind restless throughout the journey home. By the time they parted ways, Catherine felt as though she carried a burden far heavier than any physical object, a burden of unanswered questions and unspoken fears. In the days that followed, Catherine found herself reflecting deeply on the events of that fateful night. It was a turning point in her life, one that reshaped the way she viewed trust and caution. Before this incident, she prided herself on being relatively trusting, believing that most people were inherently good. Now, however, she understood that appearances could be deceiving, and that even the friendliest smiles could mask darker motives. Trust wasn't something to be handed out freely. It required scrutiny, discernment, and sometimes even skepticism. Catherine shared her experience with close friends, hoping that her story would serve as a warning to others. She emphasized the importance of staying vigilant, especially in unfamiliar environments where danger might lurk unseen. One friend remarked, "You saved yourselves that night." Not everyone would have been so quick to act. Hearing those words brought Catherine some comfort, though she couldn't help but wonder if her actions were enough. Still, she resolved to carry forward the lessons learned from that night, using them to protect herself and those around her. Despite Catherine's efforts to move on, the mystery surrounding Sebastian and Luke continued to haunt her. Nights were particularly difficult. Lying awake in bed, her mind replayed every detail of the encounter, searching for clues that might reveal their true intentions. Had they planned to drug her and Jackie? Or was this merely an accident, an unintended consequence of reckless behavior? The lack of closure gnawed at her, making it hard to fully let go of the incident. Occasionally, Catherine considered reaching out to the authorities, providing them with the limited information she had. But doubt always crept in. What if they dismissed her claims? What if nothing came of it? These uncertainties left her feeling powerless, trapped between wanting justice and fearing rejection. Sometimes, during moments of quiet reflection, she wondered whether Sebastian and Luke had moved on with their lives, unaware of the ripple effect their actions caused. This thought filled her with frustration and sadness, reminding her once again of the complexities of human nature and the unpredictability of life itself. Catherine often found herself pondering what others might do in her situation. Would they make the same choices she did, or would they take a different path? The question lingered in her mind, prompting her to reflect not only on her own decisions, but also on the broader implications of trust, courage, and responsibility. In many ways, her story wasn't unique. It was a reminder of the countless times individuals faced moral dilemmas and had to weigh competing priorities. She realized that sharing her experience wasn't just about recounting a harrowing event, it was about encouraging others to think critically about their own responses in similar situations. "If you were me," she often asked her friends, "would you leave immediately, or would you stay and seek answers?" There was no right or wrong answer, only perspectives shaped by individual values and experiences. For Catherine, the value of her story lay in its ability to spark conversations, foster awareness, and inspire action. After all, in a world where dangers often hide in plain sight, vigilance and empathy are among our greatest allies. The unthinkable theory behind the D. B. Cooper hijacking. The gray sky over the Pacific Northwest hung heavy with rain on that cold November afternoon. A man who called himself Vance walked into the Portland International Airport with a black briefcase in hand. He approached the busy ticket counter and purchased a one-way ticket for a short flight to Seattle. The year was 1971, and airport security was far more relaxed than it is today. Vance wore a dark suit and a black tie, which made him look like a typical businessman. He boarded the Boeing 727 and took his seat in the very last row of the cabin. The plane was only about one-third full, which gave him plenty of space to spread out. He ordered a bourbon and soda from the flight attendant as the plane prepared for the takeoff. The young stewardess named Florence smiled and handed him the drink before moving to help other passengers. Vance lit a cigarette and exhaled a cloud of smoke that drifted up toward the cabin ceiling. He seemed completely at ease as the engines roared to life and the plane lifted off the ground. The flight was supposed to be a short commute that would take less than 40 minutes to complete. Florence walked past him again, and he extended his hand to pass her a small folded note. She assumed he was giving her his phone number, and she slipped it into her pocket unread. Vance leaned forward and spoke to her in a voice that was low and incredibly polite and calm. He told her that she needed to look at the note immediately because he had a bomb. Florence felt a cold chill run down her spine as she unfolded the piece of paper. The note was written in neat capital letters and stated that he had a bomb in his briefcase. He motioned for her to sit down next to him in the empty seat beside the window. She hesitated for a moment, but the serious look in his eyes convinced her to follow his instructions. He placed the briefcase on his lap and unlatched the locks with a loud and distinct click. He opened the lid just enough for her to see the red cylinders and the complex wiring inside. Vance told her to go to the cockpit and tell the pilots about the situation in the rear. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency delivered to the plane upon landing in Seattle. He also demanded 4 parachutes, which included 2 primary chutes and 2 reserve chutes for his escape. The pilot contacted the authorities on the ground and relayed the specific demands of the hijacker to them. The airline president immediately authorized the payment of the ransom to ensure the safety of the passengers. The plane circled the airport for hours while the authorities on the ground scrambled to meet the demands. The passengers were told that there was a minor mechanical difficulty to keep them from panicking inside. Vance sat quietly in the back of the plane and ordered another bourbon while he waited for the news. He wore dark sunglasses that hid his eyes and made him look like a character from a movie. The sun began to set, and the heavy rain continued to pound against the fuselage of the aircraft. The lights of Seattle glowed in the distance below them as the plane continued its slow holding pattern. The atmosphere in the cockpit was tense as the pilots tried to figure out the man's plan. The authorities on the ground finally secured the money and the parachutes from a local skydiving school. The pilot announced that they would be landing shortly to refuel and resolve the minor mechanical issue. Vance checked his watch and gave strict instructions that the plane was not to be approached by police. He wanted the fuel truck to be brought to the side of the plane immediately after they landed. The wheels of the large jet touched down on the wet runway and taxied to a remote section. The lights of the terminal were far away, and the plane was surrounded by darkness and rain. A mobile staircase was rolled up to the forward door so the exchange could take place safely. The authorities handed over a heavy knapsack filled with $20 bills and the 4 requested parachutes. Vance allowed the 36 passengers to leave the plane along with 2 of the flight attendants. He kept Florence and the flight crew on board as hostages to ensure his demands were met. The refueling process took a long time because of a vapor lock issue with the fuel truck pump. Vance became agitated for the first time and demanded that the job be finished as soon as possible. He outlined his flight plan to the pilots, which was highly unusual and very specific for a hijacker. He wanted them to fly south toward Mexico City at the lowest possible speed without stalling the aircraft. He demanded that they fly with the landing gear down and the wing flaps set to 15 degrees. He also insisted that the cabin remain unpressurized so that he could open the rear door in flight. The pilots argued that they could not fly all the way to Mexico City under those conditions. They agreed to fly to Reno in the state of Nevada to refuel again before continuing south. The plane took off into the stormy night sky with only the hijacker and the crew on board. 2 fighter jets were scrambled from a nearby Air Force base to trail the hijacked airliner from behind. The visibility was so poor that the fighter pilots could not see the airliner through the clouds. Vance ordered Florence to go to the cockpit and close the door so he could be alone. She last saw him tying the heavy bag of money around his waist with a piece of cord. He was standing in the middle of the aisle and looking at the instructions on the reserve parachute. The crew in the cockpit noticed a warning light flash on the instrument panel a few minutes later. The light indicated that the rear stairway of the plane had been unlatched and was being lowered. The captain used the intercom to ask Vance if there was anything he needed from the crew. The hijacker replied with a single word over the intercom, and that was the last they heard. The plane pitched upward slightly as the weight and balance of the aircraft shifted suddenly in the air. The heavy stairs dragged in the wind and created a loud, roaring noise that filled the entire cabin. The pilots fought to keep the plane steady as it flew through the freezing rain and strong winds. They believed that Vance was standing on the rear stairs and preparing to jump into the dark void. The temperature outside was well below freezing, and the wind chill would have been absolutely brutal. Vance jumped from the plane somewhere over the dense forests of southern Washington state with the money. He leaped into a violent storm with a parachute that he could not steer and limited survival gear. The crew landed safely in Reno with the rear stairs still dragging along the runway behind them. The authorities surrounded the plane immediately, but they found that the cabin was completely empty and silent. The only things Vance left behind were his clip-on tie and a few cigarette butts in the ashtray. The manhunt that followed was one of the most extensive and expensive in the history of the country. Agents searched the dense forests and rivers of Washington state for any sign of the missing hijacker. They used soldiers and local volunteers to comb the rugged terrain for weeks without finding a single clue. The weather was terrible and the terrain was unforgiving, which made the search almost impossible to complete. The FBI interviewed hundreds of suspects, but none of them matched the description or the forensic evidence found. 9 years later, a young boy found a small portion of the money buried in the sand. He was digging a fire pit on a riverbank when he discovered 3 bundles of rotting $20 bills. The serial numbers on the bills matched the ransom money that was given to Vance that night. This discovery confirmed that he had landed somewhere in the vicinity, but it did not solve the mystery. The rest of the money and the body of the hijacker were never found by the police. The unthinkable theory that has emerged in recent years comes from the tie he left on the seat. Scientists used an electron microscope to analyze the microscopic particles that were stuck to the fabric fibers. They found traces of pure titanium and other rare metals that were used in high-tech aerospace manufacturing. In 1971, these materials were very rare and only used in a few specific facilities. This evidence suggests that Vance was not a desperate criminal or a common thief as previously thought. The theory proposes that he was a highly engineered and respected employee of the aviation industry itself. He likely worked as a manager or an engineer at a facility that built the very planes he hijacked. This would explain his specific knowledge of the hydraulic stairs and the flap settings for the aircraft. He knew exactly how the plane would handle at low speeds and how to disable the safety features. The unthinkable part is that he went back to work on Monday morning as if nothing happened. He may have lost the money during the jump, but he survived and returned to his normal life. The theory suggests he was a man who committed the perfect crime just to prove he could do it. The FBI officially closed the case in the year 2016 without ever identifying the true culprit. The name on the ticket was a fake alias that led to a dead end for investigators. The sketch of the man in the dark sunglasses remains one of the most famous images in history. People still search the woods of the Pacific Northwest, hoping to find the lost parachute or the money. The idea that a man could jump from a jetliner and vanish remains a powerful modern legend. The cold wind that blows through those trees holds the secret of what happened to the man called Vance. The flight attendant Florence lived the rest of her life wondering about the polite man in the suit. She never forgot the calm way he told her about the bomb or his gentle manners. The case changed airport security forever and led to the screening measures we all experience at airports today. It also led to a mechanical device being installed on all planes to prevent the stairs from opening. This device is named after the hijacker and ensures that no one can ever repeat his dangerous feat. The legacy of that night is written in the safety protocols of every flight that takes off today. Some believe he died on impact and his body was consumed by the wild animals of the forest. Others believe he used his knowledge of the terrain to escape and live a life of luxury. But the titanium evidence points to a quiet life lived in the suburbs by a brilliant man. A man who went to work every day and watched the news about the hijacking with a smile. He likely sat in his living room and listened to the reports of the failed search efforts. This theory transforms him from a villain into a phantom who outsmarted the entire federal government. The mystery endures because it represents the ultimate escape from the pressures of modern society and the law. We are left with the image of a man standing on the edge of the open stairs. The wind is howling around him, and the lights of the towns below are small and distant. He takes a breath of the cold air and steps forward into the unknown with total confidence. The darkness swallows him whole, and he becomes a ghost story that will be told for generations. The unrecovered money and the missing man remain the biggest unsolved mystery in American aviation history. The voice that reads you to sleep but doesn't stop. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in the small town of Willow Creek, USA. At 9:15 p.m., Emily Carter lay in her bed, clutching her favorite book tightly as she prepared for another restless night. She had always struggled with sleep, her mind racing with thoughts that refused to quiet down no matter how tired she felt. But recently, something strange had begun to happen, something she couldn't quite explain. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Emily had discovered an online audio platform where users could upload bedtime stories read aloud by volunteers. These soothing voices and gentle cadence of the narrators helped many people fall asleep faster, including Emily herself. One particular voice stood out among the rest, a soft, melodic tone that seemed to wrap around her like a warm blanket. Every night, she would listen to this mysterious reader, their words lulling her into a peaceful slumber within minutes. But there was something unusual about this voice. It didn't stop when it should have. At first, Emily thought it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. After all, who wouldn't dream of hearing comforting whispers while drifting off? Yet, as days turned into weeks, the phenomenon grew more pronounced. On one particularly vivid occasion, at exactly 10:37 p.m., Emily woke up suddenly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been dreaming, or so she thought, but the voice was still there, reading softly from somewhere nearby. Confused and slightly unnerved, Emily sat up in bed, scanning the darkened room for any sign of movement. Her bedroom was bathed in moonlight streaming through the curtains, casting long shadows across the walls. There was no one else present, yet the voice continued uninterrupted, its rhythm steady and unwavering. And then, it said, pausing briefly before continuing, the little girl realized she wasn't alone. Shaking off the unease, Emily grabbed her phone from the nightstand and checked the app. To her relief, the recording had indeed ended several minutes ago, so why could she still hear it? Determined to find answers, she pressed play again, hoping to pinpoint the exact moment when the phantom narration began. But no matter how many times she replayed the clip, the voice never deviated from its original script. It only happened after she fell asleep. Over the next few nights, Emily documented each occurrence meticulously, noting the time, duration, and content of the additional readings. What startled her most was the realization that these extra segments weren't part of the original story. They were entirely new, crafted specifically for her ears alone. They spoke of places she recognized, people she knew, and secrets buried deep within her past. Each word carried a weight that made her skin crawl, as though the voice somehow knew things it shouldn't. By Friday evening, Emily's curiosity outweighed her fear. At 9:45 p.m., she decided to confront the mystery head-on. Instead of letting the voice guide her to sleep, she stayed awake, focusing intently on every syllable. This time, the transition was clearer than ever. The recorded narration faded gradually, giving way to the live performance taking place in her room. Panic surged through her veins as she scrambled to unplug her headphones, but the sound persisted, now emanating directly from the air around her. "Emily," the voice whispered, using her name for the first time. Its tone was calm, almost friendly, but the underlying intent sent shivers running down her spine. "You've been listening for so long. Don't you want to know who I am?" Before she could respond, the voice shifted gears, recounting events from earlier in the day with eerie accuracy. It described her walk home from work, mentioning specific details like the color of her scarf and the number of steps leading up to her apartment building. Then came the questions personal, probing inquiries that delved deeper into her psyche than anyone ever had before. "Why do you stay awake at night?" it asked softly. "What are you afraid of?" Tears streamed down Emily's face as the truth spilled out, unbidden. Her fears, regrets, and deepest desires poured forth in a torrent of confession, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. And yet, the voice remained non-judgmental, offering comfort instead of criticism. For the first time in years, Emily felt truly understood. Or did she? As dawn broke over Willow Creek, casting golden light through her bedroom window, Emily finally managed to silence the voice, not by turning off her device, but by confronting the source of her insomnia head-on. Therapy sessions and journaling became staples of her routine, helping her process the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. Gradually, the nightly readings ceased altogether, replaced by natural sleep patterns that restored her energy and clarity. But even now, months later, Emily occasionally catches herself wondering if the voice was real or if it existed solely within her mind. Some nights, when the world feels especially quiet, she swears she can still hear faint echoes of its soothing cadence drifting through the darkness. And though she knows better than to seek it out again, a part of her wonders what other secrets it might have shared if only she'd let it keep talking. What happened inside this storage facility will shock you. When the storage facility on Maple Ridge Avenue first opened in 2008, it was just another anonymous row of metal doors. People rented spaces there to keep furniture, tools, or the stuff they didn't want to throw away but couldn't fit at home. The kind of place no one thinks about until something goes wrong. For nearly 15 years, nothing ever did. But in early 2022, the facility's night manager, a man named Theo Darnell, began noticing something strange. Several units showed signs of being opened after hours, even though security logs showed no entries and the padlocks appeared untouched. At first, he blamed faulty cameras or his own exhaustion from double shifts. Then one night, he saw a light flicker from Unit 56. Theo knew that unit had been abandoned for years. The owner, a man named Everett Lane, had stopped paying rent back in 2014, and the company had auctioned it off long ago. Still, the unit was supposed to be empty. When Theo checked the security feed, the monitor showed static, then a brief flash of something moving inside. He grabbed his flashlight and walked down the narrow corridor, the hum of the fluorescent bulbs echoing like a pulse. When he reached Unit 56, the air felt colder. His breath fogged as he raised the flashlight. The padlock was there, but it hung loosely, as if the latch had never been secured. He unhooked it and rolled up the metal door. Inside, the smell hit him first. Something sour and metallic. The light caught on dozens of boxes stacked neatly against the walls. Each box was labeled in the same handwriting. Evidence, do not open. Theo hesitated, then lifted the top lid on one. Inside were Polaroid photos, hundreds of them, each showing what looked like a living room. Same furniture, same lighting, but in every photo the angles were slightly different, as if someone had been documenting the space frame by frame. At first, he thought it was some sort of art project. Then he saw one picture where a person appeared standing by the couch, eyes closed, head tilted toward the camera. The next photo showed the same room, but the person was gone. Theo closed the box and backed out slowly. He called his supervisor, who told him to lock the unit and wait until morning. But when the police arrived hours later, Unit 56 was completely empty. The boxes were gone, the floor swept clean, even the dust patterns had changed. The officers thought it was a prank, maybe teenagers sneaking in, but Theo swore what he saw was real. They checked the cameras again, and this time the feed showed nothing, no static, no lights, not even Theo entering the corridor. Every frame between midnight and 3 a.m. was blank. Over the next few weeks, more reports came in from customers. One woman said she heard music coming from inside her unit when she came by to drop off old baby clothes. Another claimed she found someone's wallet inside her space, only for it to vanish when she returned with staff. The management brought in a new security company, replaced all the cameras, and even installed motion sensors. One night in May, a motion alert triggered again. Unit 56. A new guard named Raphael checked the feed and saw what looked like a person standing just inside the doorway. The figure didn't move, didn't even blink. When Raphael got there minutes later, the unit was empty again, but a single Polaroid lay on the floor. It showed Raphael himself walking down the hall toward the camera. Authorities took it seriously after that. They pulled old files and found something Theo's manager had overlooked. Back in 1997, before the facility was built, the property had been home to a private residence. The house belonged to Everett Lane's father, a man who vanished without a trace in late 1998. When developers demolished the home a decade later, they discovered a hidden basement sealed behind a brick wall. Inside were shelves stacked with boxes labeled evidence. Police records show that everything was collected, cataloged, and later destroyed, or so it was thought. By summer 2022, tenants began breaking their leases. Some claimed their belongings were being rearranged overnight. Others said their locks were swapped with older, rusted ones they'd never seen before. One man even showed footage from his dashcam that caught the faint glow of lights inside the facility at 3 a.m., though the power had been shut off hours earlier. Investigators searched again that fall, and this time they brought cadaver dogs. The animals reacted strongly near Unit 56, but no remains were found. However, one officer noticed something unsettling. When they measured the corridor, it was 3 feet shorter on the inside than the blueprints indicated. Somewhere behind the walls, there was an unaccounted-for space. They cut into the drywall and discovered a narrow passage leading to a hidden room. Inside were old boxes, just like Theo had described. Most were empty, but a few still contained Polaroids. Dozens of them, each showing the interior of the same small room, the same gray walls, and the same metal door. In some photos, a person could be seen sitting in the corner, their head resting on their knees. The timestamps written in pen showed dates from 2014, 2017, and even as recent as 2021. The facility shut down permanently a few weeks later. Law enforcement sealed the site, and the property was sold at auction to an investment group that planned to demolish it. But demolition crews reported strange interference with their equipment. Laser levels flickered, power tools cut out mid-use, and several workers said they heard whispers echoing through the corridors when no one else was there. The building was finally leveled in early 2023, but one worker, interviewed anonymously, claimed something no one could explain. When his excavator tore open the last remaining wall, he found a small metal sign, rusted but readable. It said, Unit 56, Evidence Storage. He turned away for a moment, and when he looked back, the sign was gone. Today, the land sits empty behind a chain-link fence. The new owners never built anything there. Locals say every few weeks, people still park nearby late at night, hoping to see the faint flash of a Polaroid camera from behind the fence. No one's ever caught it on video, but a few swear that if you stand there long enough, you can hear the shutter click once, followed by the sound of a metal door rolling shut. Whatever was stored in that unit may have been destroyed years ago, but the feeling remains. Something was documented there, something that didn't want to be forgotten. And if those photos are still out there, someone's probably still taking them. The stranger who knocks just before you fall asleep. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in the small town of Willowbrook, USA. The time was just after 10:00 p.m. when Claire Harper settled into her cozy bedroom at the end of another long day. Her home, a modest two-story house nestled among towering pine trees, always felt peaceful this time of night. But tonight, something about the air seemed different, a subtle tension that lingered despite her attempts to relax. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time is it there? Claire had been living alone since her parents moved out of state several months ago. At first, the solitude was refreshing, giving her space to focus on her studies and personal growth. But lately, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her from the shadows. As she climbed into bed, pulling the soft quilt up to her chin, Claire glanced at the clock on her nightstand. The glowing red digits read 10:15 p.m. She turned off the lamp beside her, plunging the room into darkness, save for the faint moonlight streaming through the curtains. Closing her eyes, she let out a slow breath, hoping sleep would come quickly. But it didn't. Instead, as the minutes ticked by, Claire became aware of a peculiar sensation, a rhythmic tapping sound echoing faintly in her mind. It wasn't loud enough to wake her fully, yet distinct enough to keep her on edge. Each knock came just as she began drifting off, pulling her back to consciousness with an unsettling jolt. At first, she told herself it was nothing more than her imagination playing tricks on her. Maybe it was the wind rattling against the windows or branches brushing against the siding of the house. But deep down, Claire knew better. This wasn't random noise, it felt deliberate, almost personal. The first time it happened, Claire dismissed it as coincidence. She was lying in bed, her thoughts wandering lazily toward dreams, when a soft tap echoed outside her door. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. 3 knocks, no more, no less. Then silence. Confused but not overly concerned, Claire called out into the dark, "Who's there?" Her voice broke slightly on the last word, betraying the nervousness she tried so hard to suppress. There was no response, only the same oppressive silence that weighed heavily on the air around her. Shaking it off, she rolled over and closed her eyes again, determined to ignore the disturbance. Sleep eventually claimed her, though restlessness haunted her throughout the night. The second night, the knocking returned, but this time it was different. Claire was halfway between wakefulness and slumber when the sound came not from the door, but closer, much closer. It seemed to originate from the wall beside her bed. each tap reverberating softly against the plaster. Thump, pause, thump, pause, thump. Her heart raced as she sat upright, clutching the blanket tightly around her chest. The room felt colder now, the temperature dropping noticeably despite the heater running steadily downstairs. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the walls that danced eerily in the dim light. "Hello?" she ventured cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. Another pause followed, stretching longer than the last, as if testing her resolve. Then came another sound, not quite a knock this time, but closer to a raspy sigh, drawn out and deliberate. It ended with what sounded suspiciously like laughter, low and guttural, reverberating faintly through the room. Fear gripped Claire tightly now, wrapping its icy fingers around her throat. She wanted to scream, to call for help, but all she could manage was shallow breathing, each inhale feeling like dragging shards of glass into her lungs. Her mind raced, searching desperately for rational explanations. Maybe it was the pipe settling after being unused for too long, anything to dismiss the unnerving reality pressing down on her. But deep inside, she knew better. By the third night, Claire was exhausted both physically and emotionally. The constant interruptions left her sleep-deprived and irritable, her once peaceful home now feeling like a prison. Determined to confront whatever force haunted her nights, she armed herself with a flashlight and her phone, ready to document any evidence should the knocking return. And return it did. This time, the sound began subtly a single tap near the foot of her bed, soft enough to be mistaken for imagination. But then it grew louder, moving across the floorboards in a pattern that mimicked footsteps. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. Closer now, almost directly beneath her bed. Claire froze, her body rigid as if any movement might provoke whatever lurked in the shadows. With trembling hands, she reached for her flashlight, flicking it on and sweeping the beam across the room. For a moment, nothing appeared unusual, just the familiar furniture and decorations she'd grown accustomed to over the years. But then, as the light passed under her bed, she saw it, a pair of glowing yellow eyes locked onto hers with predatory intensity. Claire gasped audibly, dropping the flashlight in shock. It clattered to the floor, rolling away just beyond reach. Panic surged through her veins, fueling adrenaline that urged her to act. Without thinking, she flung herself out of bed, stumbling backward toward the door. Her bare feet slapped against the cold wooden floorboards, each step accompanied by a sharp creak that echoed ominously throughout the silent house. As she reached for the doorknob, the knocking resumed louder this time, insistent and unrelenting. Words formed within the noise, though they remained jumbled and unclear. Still, their meaning carried weight, striking fear deep into Claire's core. She didn't wait to decipher them. Instead, she yanked the door open and bolted into the hallway, slamming it shut behind her. Outside her room, the house seemed eerily still once more. No footsteps pursued her, no growls echoed through the corridors. Yet, the sense of being watched lingered, stronger now than ever before. Claire pressed herself against the wall, listening intently for any sign of movement. Her breaths came fast and shallow, fogging the cool air around her. That's when she noticed the temperature drop significantly. A chill swept through the hallway, raising goosebumps along her exposed arms. Even the air itself seemed heavier, charged with an energy that crackled uncomfortably against her skin. She turned slowly, scanning each doorway leading to other parts of the house. None appeared unusual, yet none felt safe either. Deciding action was preferable to paralysis, Claire forced herself to move forward. One step at a time, she crept toward the staircase leading downstairs, careful to avoid stepping on loose boards that might betray her position. As she descended, the faint hum of electricity emanating from appliances provided some semblance of comfort, grounding her somewhat amidst the surreal events unfolding. In the kitchen, she grabbed a large chef's knife from the block on the counter, holding it tightly in front of her like a shield. Though she doubted it would offer much protection against whatever entity haunted her home, it gave her a sense of empowerment nonetheless. Armed and determined, she retraced her steps back upstairs, intent on reclaiming her room or at least retrieving her phone. Upon reaching the landing, however, hesitation took hold once more. Doubts swirled in her mind about confronting whatever waited inside her bedroom. What if it wasn't alone? What if it had grown stronger during her absence? These questions gnawed at her resolve, threatening to undo everything she'd mustered to face the unknown. Despite these fears, Claire steeled herself and pushed forward. Taking a deep breath, she swung open the bedroom door with one swift motion, ready to confront whatever awaited her. Inside, the room looked exactly as she'd left it moments earlier, untouched, undisturbed. Relief washed over her momentarily, though caution kept her guard up. Her phone lay where she'd dropped it near the edge of the bed. Bending down carefully, she picked it up and checked the screen. Several missed calls and texts from friends concerned about her well-being flashed across the display. Realizing how late or early it was, Claire decided to leave a message explaining why she hadn't responded sooner. Typing quickly, she hit send before pocketing the device securely. Just as she straightened up, intending to retreat safely back downstairs, the knocking returned, this time originating from directly behind her. Spinning around, Claire found herself face to face with nothing but empty air. Yet, the presence loomed palpable, suffocating even. The yellow eyes reappeared momentarily in the corner of her vision before vanishing completely, leaving her questioning whether she'd imagined them entirely. Exhaustion finally caught up with Claire, both physical and emotional. Tears welled up in her eyes as frustration mixed with terror overwhelmed her senses. She sank to the floor, hugging her knees tightly to her chest, and allowed herself to cry silently. In that moment, surrounded by shadows and unanswered questions, she vowed never to underestimate the power of fear again. Hours passed before dawn broke, bathing the world in golden hues that chased away the lingering darkness. Claire stayed awake the rest of the night, perched nervously in the armchair across from her bed, clutching the knife tightly in her lap. When morning finally arrived, she packed a bag hastily, determined to seek answers elsewhere. Leaving the house felt like shedding a burden too heavy to bear alone. Days turned into weeks, as Claire delved deeper into researching local folklore and paranormal phenomena tied to her family home. Along the way, she encountered others who shared similar experiences. Stories passed down through generations, warning of entities dwelling between worlds. While no definitive conclusion emerged regarding the true nature of what happened those fateful nights, Claire gained peace knowing she wasn't alone in facing such mysteries. To this day, the house remains vacant, standing as a silent testament to secrets buried far beneath its foundation. And though Claire has since moved on, starting anew in a place free from haunting knocks, memories of those nights continue to linger, etched permanently into the fabric of her soul. He knew everything. The real identity of the Zodiac Killer revealed. The fog rolled in thick and cold over the steep hills of San Francisco on that October night. The year was 1969, and the city was already on edge from a series of brutal attacks. Paul was a young taxi driver working the late shift to pay for his college tuition. He picked up a passenger in the downtown district who asked to be taken to a quiet residential neighborhood. The passenger sat in the front seat and gave calm directions as the cab moved through the misty streets. The destination was the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets in the upscale Presidio Heights district of the city. Paul pulled the yellow cab to the curb and put the transmission into park to collect the fare. The passenger did not reach for his wallet, but instead raised a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. He fired a single fatal shot into the head of the driver without saying a word. The killer then calmly exited the vehicle and walked around to the driver's side of the yellow cab. He opened the door and began to wipe down the interior surfaces with a piece of heavy cloth. He carefully removed a section of the driver's blood-stained shirt and placed it into his jacket pocket. Witnesses in a house across the street watched the entire scene unfold from an upstairs window. They called the police immediately and reported a robbery in progress involving a taxi driver and a suspicious man. The police dispatcher broadcast the description of the suspect to all patrol cars in the immediate vicinity. A mistake in the transmission described the suspect as a black male instead of a white male. Two patrol officers drove right past a white man walking away from the scene just blocks away. The man was heavy-set and wore thick-rimmed glasses and a dark jacket zipped to his chin. He walked with a slow and deliberate lumbering gait toward the darkness of the Presidio Park. The officers stopped him briefly to ask if he had seen anything suspicious in the area. He pointed them in the opposite direction and continued his walk into the foggy night and vanished. This man would soon become known as the Zodiac, and he would terrorize the region for years. The police arrived at the scene to find the driver dead and the cab wiped clean of fingerprints. They realized their mistake with the description only after the killer had already made his escape. The killer knew exactly how to manipulate the police response and exploit the confusion of the moment. He sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle a few days later to mock the police. The envelope contained the piece of the blood-stained shirt that he had taken from the driver. The letter began with the chilling phrase that would become his signature introduction to the world. He wrote, "This is the Zodiac speaking," and proceeded to detail the murder with terrifying accuracy. He claimed that he was the man the police stopped and that they had let him go. The letter was written in a bizarre mix of cursive and print with many misspelled words. He demanded that the newspaper publish his words on the front page or he would kill again. The city was paralyzed with fear as parents kept their children home from school and people stayed indoors. A seasoned detective named Vance was assigned to the case and began to look for patterns. Vance was a meticulous investigator who spent his nights staring at the maps of the crime scenes. He noticed that the killer seemed to possess a high level of intelligence despite the poor spelling. The spelling errors seemed intentional and calculated to make the police think he was uneducated. The killer included complex cryptograms in his letters that stumped the best code breakers in the world. One cipher contained 340 characters and remained unsolved for over 50 years. Vance believed that the killer had a background in the military or perhaps in naval intelligence. The boots he wore at a previous crime scene at a lake were known as wing walkers. These boots were issued primarily to personnel working on aircraft carriers to walk on the wings of planes. The killer also displayed a knowledge of radians and magnetic north in his maps and diagrams. He threatened to blow up a school bus with a bomb made from ammonium nitrate and fertilizer. He included a detailed diagram of the bomb that showed he knew how to construct complex electrical circuits. The investigation led Vance to a man who lived in a trailer in a nearby town. The suspect was a former school teacher named Lawrence, who had a history of inappropriate behavior. Lawrence was a large man who wore thick glasses and possessed a very high intelligence quotient. He had been dishonorably discharged from the Navy and had a fascination with codes and ciphers. Vance obtained a search warrant and led a team of officers to raid the small trailer. They found a freezer filled with the frozen parts of small animals that Lawrence had killed. They also found a collection of hunting knives and a pair of black military-style boots. Lawrence sat calmly at his kitchen table while the police tore his home apart looking for evidence. He wore a watch with a specific brand logo that featured a crosshair symbol on the face. This symbol was identical to the one the Zodiac used to sign his terrifying letters. Vance asked him about the watch, and Lawrence simply smiled and said he received it as a gift. He admitted that he had read a short story called The Most Dangerous Game many times. The story was about a man who hunted humans on a remote island for sport. The Zodiac had mentioned this exact story in one of his letters to the newspapers. Lawrence seemed to enjoy the attention and the game of cat and mouse with the detectives. He was ambidextrous and could write with both hands, which might explain the varying handwriting styles. Vance felt certain that he was sitting across from the monster who had killed so many people. However, the physical evidence did not provide the smoking gun that the district attorney needed. The fingerprints found on the taxicab did not match the fingerprints taken from Lawrence that day. The handwriting experts could not say for certain that Lawrence wrote the letters sent to the press. The DNA technology of the time was non-existent and could not be used to solve the case. Lawrence was released, but he remained the prime suspect in the eyes of Detective Vance. The detective followed him for years and watched his movements, hoping he would make a mistake. The suspect continued to live his life and even worked at a hardware store near the station. The unthinkable theory that Vance developed was that the killer wanted to be caught, but on his terms. He left clues that were just obscure enough to prove his superiority over the police force. He knew the police shifts and the boundaries of the different jurisdictions involved in the case. He chose crime scenes that were right on the border of counties to confuse the investigation. He knew that the different police departments would not share information effectively in the 1960s. This allowed him to slip through the cracks and continue his reign of terror for years. A survivor from an earlier attack at a golf course identified Lawrence from a lineup of photos. The survivor was a young man named Mike who had been shot while sitting in his car. He pointed to the picture of Lawrence and said that was the man who shot him. This identification gave Vance a renewed sense of hope that he could finally close the case. He prepared to bring charges against Lawrence and finally put the Zodiac killer behind bars. But fate had one final cruel twist in store for the dedicated detective and the victims. Lawrence suffered a massive heart attack in the parking lot of a grocery store and died. He collapsed on the pavement before the police could arrive to arrest him for the murders. The main suspect was gone, and the chance for a trial vanished with his sudden death. The police searched his home again after his death and found a disturbing videotape. The tape showed Lawrence talking to the camera and admitting that he had a dark secret. But he never explicitly confessed to being the Zodiac on the tape, which left room for doubt. The case remained officially open, and the mystery continued to haunt the people of California. Amateur sleuths and professional investigators spent decades trying to crack the codes he left behind. The 340-character cipher was finally solved by a team of mathematicians in 2020. The message did not reveal his name, but it mocked the police for trying to catch him. It said that he was not afraid of the gas chamber because it would send him to paradise. The solution confirmed that the killer was a rational and calculating individual who enjoyed the fame. The real identity of the Zodiac may never be proven in a court of law, but the circumstantial evidence against Lawrence remains the strongest of any suspect in the history of the case. He had the means and the motive and the opportunity to commit every single one of the crimes. He possessed the specialized knowledge of codes and maps and bombs that the killer displayed. He fit the physical description given by the witnesses and the survivors of the brutal attacks, and he owned the watch with the symbol that became the face of fear for a generation. The shadow of the Zodiac still hangs over the foggy streets of San Francisco to this day. People still look over their shoulders when walking alone at night in the Presidio Park. The yellow cabs still drive past the corner of Washington and Cherry where the driver died. The case serves as a reminder that some monsters are real and they walk among us unseen. The man who called himself the Zodiac knew everything about the police, and he used it to win. He played a game with the highest stakes imaginable, and he managed to walk away undefeated. The folder on the desk of Detective Vance gathered dust as the years turned into decades. He never stopped believing that Lawrence was the man who taunted him for so long. The letters stopped coming, but the silence was just as terrifying as the threats had been. It meant that the killer was still out there watching and waiting and living his life. The ultimate injustice was that he lived a full life while his victims were frozen in time. The realization that he likely died of natural causes is a bitter pill for the families. We are left with the chilling possibility that the truth was staring us in the face. The quiet man at the hardware store or the teacher in the classroom could be a monster. The Zodiac proved that evil does not always look like a villain from a movie screen. Sometimes evil looks like a heavy-set man with glasses who likes to go fishing on weekends. The legacy of the case is the permanent loss of innocence for an entire region, and the lingering question of whether he really did reveal his name in a code we missed. The final cipher may hold the key, or it may just be another distraction. The killer surely laughed at the thought of people chasing ghosts long after he was gone. He achieved the immortality he sought through the ink of his pen and the barrel of his gun. The name on his birth certificate matters less than the terror he inflicted on the world. He remains the most elusive phantom in the history of American crime and punishment, and perhaps that is exactly the way he planned it from the very beginning. The mystery is a puzzle with missing pieces that can likely never be found now. The witnesses have passed away, and the evidence has degraded in the storage lockers. But the story of the Zodiac is not just about the man who pulled the trigger. It is about the failure of the system and the enduring power of fear. It is a story that will be told as long as there are unsolved mysteries in the dark. The fog will continue to roll in and hide the secrets of the city by the bay. And somewhere in the archives, the truth waits for a detective who will never come. She killed her victims on camera, the disturbing files of Aileen Wuornos. The humid air of Central Florida hung heavy and thick over the dense sawgrass along the interstate highway. A patrolman stepped carefully through the muddy brush to examine the gray sedan that was abandoned near the woods. The vehicle had been sitting on the shoulder of the road for 2 days before anyone called it in. The year was 1989, and the stretch of highway was known for its isolation and long shadows. Detective Kalin arrived at the scene shortly after the patrolman discovered what was hidden in the tall grass nearby. A man's body lay face down in the dirt, and he was covered by a few discarded carpet squares. The detective swatted away the buzzing flies and knelt down to inspect the victim for any immediate identification. He noticed that the man had been shot multiple times in the torso with a small caliber firearm. The pockets of his trousers were turned inside out, and his wallet was missing from the scene entirely. Kalin stood up and looked at the endless stream of cars passing by on the busy interstate highway. He had a sinking feeling that this was not going to be a simple robbery gone wrong case. The precision of the shots and the concealment of the body suggested a cold and calculated level of violence. This was the beginning of a dark winter that would terrify the residents of the sunny southern state. The investigation moved slowly at first because there were no witnesses and very little forensic evidence to process. The humidity and the daily afternoon rains had washed away any tire tracks or footprints near the sedan. Kalin returned to the station and began the tedious work of running the license plate and vehicle registration. The car belonged to a shop owner who had been reported missing by his family 2 days prior. He was known to carry large amounts of cash and often picked up hitchhikers on his long drives. The detective pinned the photo of the victim on the bulletin board and started a new case file. 6 months passed without any major leads, and the case began to go cold in the filing cabinet. Then a second body was discovered in a wooded area in a neighboring county along the same highway. The victim was another middle-aged man who had been shot with a .22 caliber pistol. His car was found several miles away, and it had been wiped clean of any useful fingerprints. Kalin drove to the county morgue to compare the ballistics reports from the two seemingly unrelated crime scenes. The bullets recovered from both victims were a perfect match and proved they were killed by the same gun. The press began to pick up on the story and dubbed the unknown assailant the highway killer. Truck drivers and traveling salesmen were warned to be careful and not to pick up any strangers. The police profile suggested that the killer was likely a man who was drifting along the interstate system. They believed he was acting alone and using the victims for transportation and quick cash to survive. Kalin sat at his desk and stared at the map of the state marked with red pins. He felt that the profile was wrong because the victims were all large and capable men. It seemed unlikely that a single male attacker could surprise them without a struggle or signs of a fight. The break in the case finally came from a witness who saw a car veer off the road. A vehicle had crashed into a fence in a rural area, and 2 women were seen fleeing the scene. The witnesses described